When people hear about Kingdom, they usually have one of three reactions. Some people think about the live-action TV show Last Kingdom. Others think about the Berserk 2016 Chinese edition. Please correct this mistake, I beg of you. In the true God Among Chess, think about the actual manga of Kingdom. The historical epic spanning over 700 chapters about Eisei unifying the warring states of China. A epic filled with conquest, love and blood. Simply put, this is a must-read for anyone who has a hard-on for history. But let's rewind a bit, back to 2006. In Weekly Young Jump magazine, now known for publishing Tokyo Ghoul, Yasuhisa started working on Kingdom, which would go on to be massively successful and span over 700 chapters. And we're not even halfway through the fucking story. But as you can imagine, over 16 years, Kingdom changed drastically, and one thing that contributes massively to this change is the shading. Shading is something that altered the entire feel of the manga, from the generic looking style of the first few arcs, all the way to these pages actually looking like special monochrome manga covers. We went from no shading to using every shading there is. And aside from the technical side, which we'll get into, there are many different benefits to having so much shading being present within your art style. Firstly, when you have so much positive space, it allows your eyes to be far less tense when reading the manga. Negative space completely blasts your retinas like a laser beam. Because of this, your eyes can be far less tense and relaxed when actually reading this series. Even though most other mangas out there have really good art styles, the sheer amounts of negative space can really drive your reading experience in a negative way. To put it simply, it's like comparing Discord light mode to dark mode. In the beginning of the series, the mangaka would sparsely use cross-hatching on the actual characters as shading, and this would fluctuate, and gray and dark tones were specifically used only for the backgrounds. As the series progressed, the mangaka started to use every single type of shading there is on the actual characters as well, allowing the series to have this grimy and hyper-realistic look whilst maintaining its art style. Yasuhisa starts to utilize a lot of vertical lines, not only to convey detail and shading, but also to convey volume and scale of these objects. To give an example, look at Chainsaw Man and Berserk. On these creatures' bodies you can see a lot of shading, and these shadings are bent in a way. This allows for these creatures to actually convey volume and scale in a two-dimensional space, making them feel almost 3D. But you might be asking, how can you just utilize so many different shadings whilst not making the series
look
like a polished turd? And well, it's kinda simple. It has everything to do with line work. Line work is the single most consistent thing about Kingdom's art. From chapter 1 to chapter 721, it was always smooth, connecting all of these lines almost in a single stroke. It was very smooth and clean. It isn't like Jujutsu Kaisen. It didn't go from smooth to rough. If the series had actual rough and sketchy feel to its line work, well, things would actually be completely indistinguishable. The line work is a fine balance to the chaotic nature of the shading, allowing the series to actually convey proper detail in what's going on in these panels, whilst keeping its grimy and hyper-realistic look. Anatomy is a weird part in Kingdom because over time, it became anatomically correct and incorrect at the same time. It's kinda bizarre. But let me explain. So in the beginning of Kingdom, the character's muscle definition and anatomical structure was very accurate. As you can see on the arms, the muscle definition is very in line with what humans actually look like. There are proper curves and indents present within it. But as the series progresses, these characters become buff, but not in an All Might way. They become like cylindrical buff, like there is no muscle definition, it is just meat. Their arms actually look like a slab of meat was put around the skeleton. There is no muscle definition at all, it is actually a fucking cylinder. They almost look like fucking Roblox characters. In the beginning of the series, the mangaka would frequently break characters' models to convey any emotion he wanted. This made the characters look completely unrecognizable at times, like who the fuck is this guy? Why does shit look like that? It is bizarre. The mangaka would try really hard to convey certain emotions from these characters, but honestly, for me at least, many times it will fall flat because it simply doesn't fit the actual aesthetic of Kingdom. It is too out there. It's like One Piece art. But thankfully, as the series progressed, the mangaka would stay in line with these characters' models, whilst also expressing many different ranges of emotions. Along with this, the actual facial constructions within these characters changed. The eyes became slightly smaller, and noses and mouths got a lot more detail, and makes them look like actual noses and mouths. Unlike in most anime where artists just draw two lines and call it a day. In Modern Kingdom, there are two things that are critical to its survival: the backgrounds and action. When it comes to action, the mangaka would try really hard to convey speed and power, but he would kinda, more often than not, kinda fail. The choreography and clarity is there, but he adds a lot of speed lines to these moves, but the consequence of this sword hitting something else is kinda bland. The actual dynamic nature of these panels is very lacking. And when the mangaka tries to convey a lot of speed at once, he really falls flat, genuinely. It is kinda bad, because take a look at this panel. You can see that Shin is swinging his sword, but you can't actually see him swinging his sword. You can only see like speed lines cutting this guy apart, and that's it. There is no speed to it, there is no motion, no impact to it. It is just some lines cutting a guy, and that's it. Compared to this general slicing apart his enemies like it's nothing, you can see actual motion and speed behind it, along with the consequence of these swings. It leads a trail of destruction. And even smaller scale ones, like look at this one. The guy is moving at lightning speed, but you can actually see the weapon move. You can actually see the impact and consequences of these swings, something early Kingdom lacked. Simply put, there was a lot of improvements to be made, and the same thing could be said when conveying actual destructive power. In the early parts of Kingdom, you could see the predecessor to these panels, but they lacked a lot of things. Firstly, what makes this panel so fucking amazing is because the mangaka uses many different forms to convey not only speed, but also destructive power. Firstly, this panel isn't flat. The mangaka uses forced shortening to give an illusion as if the actual attack is coming in your face. And lastly, when these characters swing, we don't only see the actual impact, we see a split-second aftermath. This allows us to properly comprehend the sheer speed and impact behind these attacks. The panels I showed didn't actually use speed lines, but even when the mangaka uses them, it is so fucking good. Like, look at these panels, dude. Like, actual speed lines look like they are a part of the weapon and a part of the motion. It isn't there as a complementary detail, but it actually is the attack. It is part of the weapon and part of the motion. Backgrounds as of now are pivotal to Kingdom's art. If you remove the backgrounds, you basically have absolutely nothing. And let me tell you, in the beginning of Kingdom, backgrounds were kinda meh. Don't get me wrong. Yasuhisa was always able to convey a lot of detail within his backgrounds. They were always beautiful when they became center of focus, but it wasn't really present within the manga. It was sparsely located and the detail was also fluctuating a lot. Along with this, when we got massive scale shots of these backgrounds and environments, they kinda lacked detail. The mangaka would only focus on the actual outlines of these environments, adding small details to them in order for us to actually understand the shape and the general idea of what the environment should be. But that's about it. Later in Kingdom, every single part of these environments is painstakingly drawn to the fucking leaves on the ground. It is actually incredible. But there is this one panel that conveys the entire improvement in Kingdom's art. This panel is simply magnificent. It has absolutely everything the mangaka learned in the last 16 years. The incredible detail, the amazing vast landscapes, the character designs, the shading, the